Welcome back to another episode of the Top 5 in 5. And today we're talking about how to launch a good podcast, not just launch a podcast. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of people launching podcasts and they should not have a podcast. But maybe I should. And I have one. I have two, actually. I love them. And to be honest, I've found some unique ways to make it simple. So in today's episode, I'm going to break down the 5 things you should think about to launch a good podcast. Now, number one, at the end of the day, I think we all have to have a topic that we either are super clear and know really, really well, or we're desiring to know really, really well. I think sometimes we get in these podcasts because it's in line with the brand and it would be great to do this thing and there's a cool name, but we don't actually think about a podcast takes energy. Like I got to give a lot in my episodes. I have 2 podcasts, one's solo and one's an interview podcast. There's a reason why I do 2 different ones. But what I realized the entire time was like, when I'm on the All Shift podcast, which is my interview podcast, I am asking other people about their moments and I desire to know. Right? If I didn't desire to know, I would be drained getting on an episode every day, talking to people I really don't want to talk to. And right. So don't do a podcast just because you heard you should do a podcast. Do one because you actually want to know what are these people thinking, what goes on in their head. And you want to do it for yourself. To be honest, I started the podcast so I could have cool people to talk to. It was a selfish thing. I wanted to know who I was talking to. I want to find cool people in the world. And I was like, well, a good reason to do is to ask them. So make sure that you go out in the world and find something you either know really well and can talk about in a solo podcast or something that you desire to know deeply about other people and humanity. Now, number 2, simple. Solo if you know it, guest if you don't. Solo means you know a topic. You're an expert. You're consistently learning and studying, and you're in the trenches on maybe, I don't know, the best way to do keto, right? Or maybe you want to teach people how to stack rocks. You know those little cool rocks they do? How do they do that? I don't even know. I seriously have no idea. Those cool rocks they stack. I try. But like, if you know something, do a podcast breaking down the areas that somebody wants to know about it, because you can go expansive on it. I wouldn't even know how much stuff there is to know, because think about it. We don't know. We don't know. If we don't know, we don't know it. You know what I'm talking about. So that's one. If, however, you do have an area where you don't know something, but you desire to know, do a podcast where you guest, bring amazing guests on who know topics and areas and interview them. Ask questions that the everyday person might want to know or your audience might want to know, but you can't go out there and do a solo podcast on a topic you're learning about. To be quite honest, it's not always the best. I mean, that's what social media is for. If you're on the journey, I'll go ahead and pop on and pay attention to your journey, but I'm not going to listen to a podcast about you telling me what you read, right? Because you don't know it. So make sure you understand which side of the coin you sit on, because if you do that, it's good. Next, you create double the amount of episodes that you need for a month. Now, most people go, oh, put 2 in the can, put 3 in the can. You know what I ask? How many are you going to release? Now, I release 3 episodes of the Oz Shift podcast every single week. We do 5 episodes of the Shift Starter Daily every single week, which means I got to have a good amount in the can, or else what happens is you rush. And when you rush a podcast, rush creation, it never comes out right, to be quite honest. So what you want to do is before you launch that podcast, spend time making sure you've built up a good backlog of at least a month. Like at least, if you want to call it a month's worth. So if you're doing, I don't know, say 3 a week, have 24. You're going to be doing 1 a week, have 8, right? So double the amount. So what happens is when you start it, you have a cushion to create. It creates open space to listen to your audience, to get feedback, to refine your own process, and like figure out how it kind of goes, and in time settle into your own groove. But you got to make sure you have a certain amount of podcasts to give yourself a space to make it a good podcast by learning and reflecting and getting things dialed in. Then build a launch that in a sense complements everything else you're doing, right? So what I mean by that is you got to complement everything you're doing in your social, everything you're doing in your business, whatever it may be. It's got to be an omnipresence. Now, I say omnipresence, you must launch in a space that complements what you do and is everywhere, right? So when you do put it out there, don't just be like, hey guys, new post. Like it's no different than you post your breakfast this morning, right? So make sure you put it out there. It's like, hey, I know the date I'm going to put it out. I'm going to make sure it complements what I already do, so it's not some left field topic, but also I'm going to be everywhere when I do. Get a launch team, make sure you're going to post on every single social media platform, create assets in advance, like flood the realm of what you're doing so people know it's there. And then once it's there, keep it in the stream of conversation, keep it inside of posts, keep it inside of your email, keep it going. That's how you get listens and follows and people pay attention, right? Got to consistently do that. So make sure when you launch it, you don't launch it to just crickets. Put it out into the world and be everywhere when you do. Omnipresence, and make sure it complements what you already do in your social content, your flow. Now, number 5, this is the one you may not want to hear. And I think it's the most important one. When you start your podcast, you better commit to 500 episodes at minimum. Commit to 500. Here's why. Truthfully, there are like 2 million some odd podcasts that are registered, but I think like honestly less than half of those have posted an episode in the last 90 days. Quite literally. So what people do is they start a podcast. It's cool. They don't have a return. They're not getting better. Like they don't even know if it's worth their while. So they eventually just don't post one. And all of a sudden they don't post the next one and the next one and the next one. All of a sudden it disappears. And then what you do is like you've actually diminished trust with the audience who was listening to you in the first place because you say you're going to do it and then you don't do it. For me, I do not start a podcast, and I don't recommend anybody does unless you are in it for the long haul. It takes time, but if you do it right, you build a great audience, you great connection, you get great growth out of it because you're learning the entire process of how to get better every day. Because for me, I realize when I start, just like you, when we start, we're going to suck at it. I'm not going to know what I'm doing. So if you spend time actually in the trenches learning how do I record better, what's the best equipment, how do I intro, how do I ask questions, what's the structure of every single episode, whether it is solo, whether it is a guest, how do I recap the conversation, whatever it might be, spend time in 500 episodes refining it. Because what happens if you get that far, you'll go much farther, much easier. And then you will have not just a good podcast, but a great podcast. So those are my top 5 in 5 ways to launch a good podcast.